Dear colleagues, shall we start? Using the right of the host, I would like to propose a small changes in agenda, meaning that we will combine two afternoon sessions and we try to end our session till the coffee break. Otherwise, I fear that our audience will disappear in the meantime. And then to keep you here, we will work non-stop till the coffee break. And then for these shifting of agenda, we will still first discuss the financing, followed by possibilities to ask questions, and then some words on the way forward. And as you can imagine, the reasoning for including this session on financing is that no money, no actions, and we have to find the ways how to finance our actions. The most obvious sources for financing, of course, there are national, regional budgets and some of the EU funding. Some of these we already discussed yesterday when discussing land use issues regarding the rural development program and its measures. But also for 2014-2020, multi-annual financial framework also provides for several opportunities via thematic objective 4, which is on resource mobilization, thematic objective 5 on climate change mitigation and adaptation, and thematic objective 6 for biodiversity protection. These are the thematic objectives where member states could find some ways of financing biodiversity issues. And that's why today we have with us Mr. Sander Happaerts, representing the Competence Center Smart and Sustainable Growth from DG Regio, who will give us short view on opportunities provided by the cohesion policy and how member states are using those opportunities. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and thanks very much to the Latvian Presidency for inviting me at this very interesting event. Unfortunately, I only arrived today, so I missed the first half of it. But as I hear there are now many problems with air traffic in Belgium, it seems that I might stay a bit longer in Riga than planned. So it's on times like this that I wished I had packed my toothbrush. Anyway, the reason why I only was able to come for one day is that now at DG Regio we are extremely busy as we are moving from the programming phase of our funding to the implementation phase. And one of the areas that we are paying attention to is exactly biodiversity, which is what I would like to talk to you about. It was actually during the Latvian presidency a few months ago that we celebrated the 40th birthday of cohesion policy. So this policy has made enormous investments into EU member states and regions for the past 40 years, and also for biodiversity. So for instance, if we look at the previous programming period from 2007 to 2013, there was about 2.6 billion of direct investments into biodiversity and nature protection that has been programmed. As of now, most of this money is already allocated to specific projects, but it is until the end of 2015, so the end of this year, that member states can still use this money, so we don't have final numbers yet. And besides this 2.6 billion, there was an additional 900 million euros for the promotion of natural assets and 1.1 billion for the protection and development of natural heritage. And this is often in relation with tourism. But of course, next to this, there are several other indirect investments from cohesion policy that are very relevant for nature protection and for biodiversity, such as improvement of wastewater treatment, waste management, the rehabilitation of contaminated sites. So all these things contribute to biodiversity and are important in our funding. So in this period, we are funding or have co-funded projects all across Europe that are interesting examples, such as wetland restoration projects in Greece, Romania, green corridors in France, the Alpine Carpathian Green Corridor from Austria to Slovakia, flood alleviation projects across Europe. Here in the Baltic region, we have funded projects on coastal zones management. There were projects on biodiversity research in the Canary Islands. So many different projects on different topics within biodiversity. In a recent analysis by the European Court of Auditors, in a recent audit, it was found that the co-funded projects from cohesion policy do match member state and EU priorities for biodiversity. Often in the previous period, these projects were about preparation of protection and management plans, so now it will be important to move to the implementation of these plans. And also a finding of the Court of Auditors was that not all member states always viewed cohesion policy funds as an adequate instrument for promoting biodiversity. So this is an additional reason to look very carefully at the opportunities for the next programming period. I will not go into details here, but in this current programming period from 2014 to 2020, there have been significant reforms of cohesion policy. Of course, overall economic, social, and territorial cohesion is still the main goal, so reducing disparities within Europe, and that is why most investments, most money will go into the less developed regions, which are the ones that you see indicated in red here. One of the changes of this programming period is that cohesion policy will be much more strategic, so there are thematic objectives that are set to deliver the Europe 2020 goals. There is thematic concentration, meaning that a specific share of the funding has to go into specific ones of these thematic objectives, and there is also much more attention to performance and results. So for instance, within the area of biodiversity, there is a common indicator about the surface area of habitat supported to attain a better conservation status. So we are very focused towards the results that our funding will achieve. So part of the reform is that we have now 11 thematic objectives, and all the funding, which is, as you have seen, 350 billion, has to be channeled through these priority objectives, which are in line with the Europe 2020 strategy. The main direct investments for biodiversity will be under thematic objective 6, which is environmental protection and resource efficiency. Member states have allocated 33 billion, so about 10% of all funding to this thematic objective. There are several investment priorities within this. The main one is protecting and restoring biodiversity and soil and promoting ecosystem services, including through Natura 2000 and green infrastructure, so the main significant one for biodiversity. But we also have opportunities for protecting and promoting natural and cultural heritage, and to take action to improve the urban environment. So these are some of the opportunities within thematic objective 6. But there is also thematic objective 5, climate change adaptation and risk management and prevention, and this has about 7 billion euros. And this is, among other things, for supporting investments for adaptation to climate change through ecosystem-based approaches. So this is also very relevant for green infrastructure and nature, if we think about flood prevention measures, for instance. So the main investments within thematic objective 5 are for flood prevention, and hopefully a big part of it are through ecosystem-based approaches and green infrastructure. Then there is also thematic objective 4, which has 38 billion. It's one of the most popular because of this thematic concentration. This is the only objective that all regions, all programs had to select. This is mainly about the low carbon economy, so energy efficiency, renewable energy, but it can also fund mitigation relevant adaptation measures. For instance, peatland restoration, certain energy efficiency building, investments in buildings with green roofs, for example, that can also be very relevant for biodiversity and nature. Now, we are still finishing the programming phase, meaning that not all of our almost 280 programs not all of them have been adopted yet, so we don't have final numbers yet. But it is very clear that as it is now, investments for biodiversity will probably be higher than in the previous period. So as I mentioned, this main category of biodiversity and nature protection in the previous period, 2.6 billion. This will probably be higher in the current period, but we cannot give final numbers so far. I can also say that this particular category of biodiversity seems to be one of the most popular of the environmental topics. So a large majority of member states have selected it, one of the most popular environmental investments. And we also see that it is very popular in all the cross-border programs. So of course this is a very relevant topic in terms of transboundary cooperation, and biodiversity is one of the most popular topics there. So what are these funding opportunities then about? So I think it's very relevant in line with the topic of this conference. So our priority for funding into biodiversity is to implement EU nature and biodiversity policies. So this is the main framework of intervention of these investments. So to support the goal of halting biodiversity loss, investing in restoration, green infrastructure, etc. So cohesion policy can, for instance, support the development and implementation of Natura 2000 through ecosystem restoration projects, improving the knowledge base, developing nature awareness, etc. Already before, in previous periods, there was the awareness that investments in biodiversity and nature are relevant as a source of socio-economic development. But now there is an additional and strong focus on green infrastructure as an opportunity for win-win projects. And we try to have this opportunity to fund green infrastructure in different fields. So I already mentioned flood protection, but there is also urban development, urban regeneration, and tourism investments in which we would like to see this green infrastructure. Funding should be channeled in projects which have a real EU added value, and this should be based on a preliminary analysis and assessment of needs. Much more important in this period will also be the synergies with other investments and other sources of funding. So I already mentioned investments into the low carbon economy, into climate change adaptation, but we also have the investments into research and innovation. And from cohesion policy, this is about 40 billion. And also for research, development and innovation, there can be a lot of relevant projects related to nature and protected areas. Think of pilot actions for payments for ecosystem services, which can be funded through this money, innovation systems based on natural assets. There can also be funding for these areas in the funding that is related to the support for SMEs, if we think about, for instance, SMEs in the ecotourism sector. And then synergies can be found with other sources of EU funding, such as Horizon 2020. If you are interested in this, we have developed a guide on synergies, so with specific practical guidance on how to find synergies between cohesion policy and other sources of funding, such as Horizon 2020. Besides that, within cohesion policy, there are many opportunities for support through the cross-border, the transnational, and the interregional cooperation programs. So I already said many of the cross-border programs have selected biodiversity and nature as an investment priority. There are also the macro-regional strategies, such as, for instance, here in the Baltic Sea region, which can be very useful platforms to coordinate investments for this funding period also on biodiversity. But besides these synergies, one of the other fundamental reforms for the current period for cohesion policy is the strong horizontal integration of sustainable development. So we have in our common provisions regulation the article on sustainable development, which also states that member states and the Commission shall ensure that biodiversity is promoted in the preparation and the implementation of partnership agreements and programs. And so this means that in all types of funding, also for transport projects, for instance, this should be taken into account. So how can this be done? For instance, by directing all the investments towards the most resource efficient and sustainable options, by avoiding investments that may have a negative or significant negative environmental or climate impact, by adopting a long-term perspective with life cycle costs, by increasing the use of green public procurement, etc. And this is done at various phases. So for instance, in the operational programs, in all of these programs, there was a specific section dedicated to this principle. The monitoring committees, which are in charge of overseeing the use of the funds, they have to take this into account. When project selection criteria are defined, this principle can also be taken into account. So this has a very large potential impact. There is also the provision in the ERDF regulation, which states that 5% of all the funds should be allocated to integrated actions for sustainable urban development, and this is can be a very relevant hook as well for investments into green infrastructure, because these will often be used, or these can often be used in urban areas. And also here, we are very happy to see that this 5% will be much exceeded. So as it looks now, it seems that member states have allocated about 8% overall of their ERDF funding to sustainable urban development. Of course, cohesion policy should not just be seen as a big pile of money. We also consider enabling conditions to ensure that the funds are well spent and that they reach the result. So I talked about this result orientation in the beginning. This is done through several ways. So first of all, we have the ex-ante conditionalities, which is another novelty of this period. And these are conditions that have to be fulfilled to ensure that the strategic, institutional, and legal framework is in place for an efficient and effective use of the funds. Of course, within the area of biodiversity, there is no ex-ante conditionality. So we have this, for instance, for water investments, for waste investments, but not for biodiversity, so I will not dwell on it any longer. Besides that, DG Regio and the European Commission helps member states and regions to invest in capacity building tools, because we have seen in past periods that a lack of administrative capacity is often a reason for lagging implementation. And we are doing this through multiple instruments. So for instance, a few weeks ago, we launched a new instrument called Peer-to-Peer, which is a tool through which cohesion policy experts from specific member states can help other member states with a specific question or problem that they have. So this is something that can be very useful for you as well if you are involved in our funding, and which you can use. We have DG Regio together with DG Environment, the European Network of Environmental Authorities and Managing Authorities. This is a network of all the 28 member states with the managing authorities who manage cohesion policy funds and the environmental authorities. So if you don't know this, you can get in touch with your environmental authorities at home and see how you could be involved in this network, because it's a very interesting one. We also have the Smart Specialization platform, which is managed by the JRC, which helps regions and member states for their innovation investments. And this could be useful, for instance, for innovation in bioeconomy or other areas. But of course, everything that I said so far is about the framework and the opportunities that exist within cohesion policy in this period, and it is up to the member states and up to you in part as well to use the opportunities of this funding to deliver good projects, because cohesion policy operates under the principle of shared management, meaning that it is the member states who select the project. So what we have done and what we are still doing for those programs still to be adopted is to make sure that we have good frameworks in place, and we have tried, for instance, to push for at least to have the potential for green infrastructure as much as possible where relevant in all the areas of the operational programs, but it's up to the member states to make sure that good projects are selected as we are moving into the implementation phase. We will have again in this period millions of projects in total. One example here is the sustainable forest management in the Baltic Sea region of the FE Nord project. which will serve as an umbrella for forestry-related projects within the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region. So this is one of our macro-regional strategies. It focuses on the development of a sustainable bioeconomy and will fund several projects that could be interesting right here in the Baltic Sea region. So I invite you to take a look at this website if you're interested. Some more information about the different things that I have mentioned here can be found in this guide on green infrastructure, which offers some advice on how to find the different opportunities for biodiversity and green infrastructure for this financing period. And it also includes many interesting examples and best practices from the previous programming period. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm here, or otherwise, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanders, for this presentation, and especially for your sharing your feeling that for this MFF period, the investments for biodiversity will be higher than in previous period. But I really hope that when your final analysis will be done, you will share that, and I hope that final analysis you will confirm your feelings. And during the informal council, to which we have referred several times, that was also mentioned that financing of grey infrastructure is always considered as investment. However, funding of biodiversity-related projects are always considered as a cost. And then we have to change our terminology, even when we are speaking ourselves, that also investing in the natural capital and then in green infrastructure should be regarded as an investment, not as a cost. So, some years ago, the European Commission presented the study on the Natura 2000 management and restoration costs, and it turned out that for the Natura 2000 network alone, which is only the target one of the EU Biodiversity Strategy, the costs are more than 6 billion per year. It means that for the biodiversity protection and management in the broader sense, that the financial needs are much more higher. Therefore, we should search for another ways of financing and ways of attracting private funding. This morning, we have heard some examples of payment for ecosystem services implemented in some member states or via some projects. But I think that this experience should be shared more. And for the attraction of the private funding, we need some appetizers showing the business case of investing into biodiversity management. And today we have with us Mr. James Ranaivason, which is managerial advisor from European Investment Bank, which will be the responsible authority and the responsible institution for the implementation of natural capital financing facility. Probably you have heard already this term and the theory behind this facility several times, but now when the facility is getting operational, it would be very interesting to hear what type of the projects are coming in and where are the benefits for the biodiversity and where are the business cases. Mr. Ranaivason, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much to Ilona and her team to having taken into account our late registration and having made this possible for us to make the presentation today. I know that a few of you have already heard about what is a natural capital financing facility, but I think that for the sake of harmonizing, let's say, the context and the information, I would share my presentation into sixfold. The first one is, okay, what is the EIB and how it works in general let's say, to give a reason why it is a natural partner for implementing the natural capital financing facility. The second is what is the demand of innovative finance for biodiversity and natural capital seen by the bank, and how the EIB can answer. The third is what is the NCFF and for which purposes exactly. The fourth part is what is its status today, because we signed with the Commission the delegation agreement to manage it in February 2015. The fifth part is how the NCFF works in practice. And to conclude, I would like to share, or during the questions and answers, how the audience could help gathering more proposals. The EIB is the bank of the 28 EU member states, for those who don't know it. It is a very big institution in the sense that it is the largest lender and borrower among the supranational institutions. We finance some 400 projects per year, and 10% of that, for information, is outside of Europe. And the main priority objectives are climate change, infrastructure, energy, SMEs, and regional development. An idea of the volume is something like around 70 billion without what it is called today the Juncker Plan. So that is roughly this last 2 years, and still to be done within the next coming years. And 25-26%, something like that, of the bank's lending volume is dedicated to climate action and environment. And you have here some ideas of figures, and I can say that around natural capital and adaptation projects, last year it was around 1.2 billion in terms of amount, but we have other places that could be more or less overlapping with environmental objectives. Another important information about the EIB that, let's say, makes it the natural partner of the Commission also to implement the natural capital financing facility is that environmental and social standards are mainstreamed in all our projects, whatever the project is. And we work based on 10 performance standards, as we call it. Some of you may know how the IFC standards are. Ours is at least as stringent as the IFC standards, and they are around these 10 principles. And the main, the two of them that, let's say, is highly relevant for what we do here is about the assessment and management of environmental and social impact and risk for all these projects in respecting the ranking of impact and risk, taking account of the affected communities, and all these aspects that all of you may know about conducting projects. We also have the standard number 3, which is about biodiversity and ecosystem services. And as far as we can, we provide an intrinsic value to biodiversity and ecosystem services, apply that in terms of sustainability, equitable sharing of benefits, and so on. I will not talk too long about it, but if there are questions about that, we can raise it later on during the question and answers session. In terms of how we identify the, let's say, the financial instruments with regards the challenges of financing conservation and natural capital projects, we have more or less established this chart where the things that depending on the nature of outputs of a project, we identified the kind of financing instruments that are matching, let's say, this kind of financing this kind of output, and who are the natural kind of investors that could finance this kind of projects. So from my left, private assets, where like forest plantation, afforestation, deforestation, and so on, sustainable agriculture. We can think that this could be financed by the very classical equity funds in kind of loans, and with, let's say, the traditional investors and funds. Whenever you move with some, let's say, public component in terms of output, because you need to add some nature-based actions in it, or when there is a necessity to do some green production, sustainable infrastructure with it, you start then of looking at combining various kind of investments with typologies of investors who could take some risk or another, or could sustain a certain level of risk but need to be supported by another partner. And that's why we have, depending if it is banks, if it is private sector companies or venture capital funds or whatever, and could be supported by development finance institutions like the EIB, like KfW, like the Caisse des Dépôts in France or whatever, that may then help the private investors going into such kind of projects. And on the far right, on my far right, those are typically more public goods there for kind of ecosystem services where it is often difficult to provide, let's say, an immediate value. There it is more of the domain of donors, of governments, philanthropists, and so on, but it could also be with some kind of impact investors and so on that could then go to invest them. And after that, the instruments with blending rates, with grants, with only lending to public agencies, and so on. And for us, as EIB being the largest among the supranational institutions, we try also, as far as we can, to develop the market of green bonds, of climate green bonds, because, as many of you may know, this is the largest pocket of financial instruments where institutional investors and high net worth individuals are with hundreds of trillions of stocks of bonds. So the idea is at least to bring a small percentage of that, especially to finance sustainable projects like natural capital projects particularly. So we try, for whatever the kind of output, to identify how it works, but for the time being, for example, we are more concentrating on infrastructure for renewable energy, for example, but we will try to expand that kind of bonds that we currently issue to something else, especially wherever we can regroup some biodiversity a natural capital project, we will try to do that. So then, the EIB, facing all these kind of situations, we have now adapted how we finance them. So we came from, on the top, from our very classical way to intervene in the market, which is only to lend. We borrow in the market, we are AAA institution, and after that we lend senior, etc., to the public sector, to project finance, or to banks whenever it is about small projects or about SMEs. And that was what we did to reach whatever kind of project, classically. These last years, given the challenges of smaller projects, of climate action, of the fact that a lot of business models have not yet been tested, this is the case for biodiversity, natural capital, and etc. We try more and more to be in partnership with the European Commission and try from there to get some sort of first loss protection for the EIB, because being a AAA institution in the financial markets more or less obliges to only finance something that is acceptable to the market in terms of maintaining our AAA institution, so that the NCFF and many other financial instruments, among them the INOFIN, have been built on this model, which is we get some first loss protections on these risky, small business models still to be built, some sort of protection from the European Commission. And we call all these three things that are in green, our special activities, let's say. We also do some equity directly through funds. And those of you who have heard about the Juncker plan, it is more or less doing more equity and getting from the Commission some protection. And we will see here how then the leverage of the European Union budget plus the capacity of the EIB to reach a variety of projects could be used to reach a lot of projects that today may not find enough financiers. So that's generally speaking about the EIB and the context, the reason why the EIB is the natural partner of the Commission to work on natural capital. I will not spend too much time on what is natural capital, because most of you know it, but I only want to insist, and I wasn't here yesterday, but you all know that the big market failure is about the lack of the big problem is the lack of market-based instruments because of a lot of market failures that you have discussed here. And for example, I heard this morning about some business models in payment for ecosystem services, pilot projects. Probably many of them deserve to be expanded, reach other stages. There are a lot of market-based instruments that need to be tested. So we have classified, following the biodiversity strategy 2020 with the Commission and with the member states, that the typologies of projects would be green infrastructure, the deals that are based on payment for ecosystem services, the projects that are designed for compensation offsetting, and a wide definition of what could be pro-biodiversity businesses, but probably emphasizing on the small and medium enterprises working in this area. So what's a natural capital financing facility then? Based on all that, it is to focus on proof of concept and pilot projects for ecosystem services and climate adaptations. So for all biodiversity, land use, forestry, soil, water, and so on. The focus then, as I said, market-based instruments. The main problem, if you can summarize it, finance cannot be summarized like that, but let's say it is because it is too risky, and because it's not tested. If you think that it is bankable, that means that you need a lot of upfront payment, and you have to ensure, because it will only become bankable on the longer term, that you have to immobilize your capital for a long period. And that's the basic of it. Okay? That is a basic risk of projects that is very difficult to finance. And the NCFF is meant to allow these very difficult projects to be financed. Another aspect, which is also not negligible, is small projects. The EIB was only with these categories of projects that I mentioned, big loans and etc., because it only wanted for many years to reach big projects, especially infrastructure. But we felt that there are more and more demand today on smaller projects, and biodiversity, conservation, and etc. are also a lot of bundling small projects. So the NCFF is also aiming to reach the small projects. So, having said that, a few words. I think you know all which are green infrastructure, but we are now building our pipeline. Green infrastructure, and this is today what is more or less we have seen in what has been proposed to us for the time being. Restoration of degraded land, restoration of or implementation of habitat corridors, afforestation, adaptation through fire prevention, flood protection, erosion control, some projects that could be rural or in water catchment or in urban area for water treatment or water purification, and a few urban green infrastructure projects like green roofs or green walls or whatever. We have seen that. I think DEFRA this morning presented a few examples of payment for ecosystem services. I mentioned here Brand, which is one of the most well-known, having initiated, let's say the flagship project in terms of payment for ecosystem services in France. But many of the projects presented this morning are more or less following this idea of those that are benefiting the ecosystem services, paying those that are providing it. So that is applicable for water resources, protection of forest, protection of biodiversity. And this is the second category, and we have seen a few of that in the expression of interests that have been presented to us. Then compensation offsetting. It is often, here the example is about highways, but there are a lot of infrastructure projects that by law or voluntarily and so on needs compensation if Europe would like to reach its no net loss objectives. This should be improved, implemented, of course, following to be compatible with the mitigation hierarchy. We'll talk about that whenever you want. And the pro-biodiversity businesses, which is quite wide, as I said, especially for SMEs, but it is about sustainable forestry, sustainable agriculture. We talked a lot, I've heard a lot this morning about ecotourism, about parks, national parks and so on, about sustainable fisheries, and probably there are a lot more, especially that involves corporations improving the value chain of their production. So, the NCFF, to be sure that it is understandable to everybody, is then a joint instrument by the EIB and the European Union from the life, environment and climate budget. So the natural capital financing facility is fully financed by the EIB up to 125 million, but it will benefit from the protection of euro 50 million used as first loss from the life budget. So that's the principle of it. So all the investments would be the EIB, and you will see later why I insist on that when we'll talk about how it will work in practice. In addition, very, very important, the life budget also provides with 10 million euro of technical assistance support, let's say, facility for each project that are deemed eligible to be financed by the NCFF. Now, to meet all these pilot business models, all cases that I explained earlier, we are considering either direct investments in projects or, if it is the case of smaller projects, to partner with banks to whom we will provide credit lines, and then they would be able to reach smaller projects that will meet the eligibility of the NCFF. And also wherever there are rather demand for equities instead of debt, also to take participation in private equity funds. And of course, the idea is to bring in co-investors, be they from the public sector or from the private sector. So that is really the NCFF infrastructure. And not mentioned here, but the expected, let's say, multiplier of the EIB and Commission involvement, financially speaking, in this is probably a multiplier of, for the European Commission, 50 million of first loss, let's say, mobilized for this, something around 4 to 5 times minimum of what they provided here in this budget. So that is probably, given the challenges of biodiversity, many of you may know what are exactly the needs in conservation, in biodiversity financing, in all these things. This looks like a drop in this ocean of needs. However, I think it is important to test, to start with this pilot project and expecting that later on, for example, even from other directorates, the DG Regio, for example, when it is identified in some places that this could be replicated, or by DG RTD, whenever there are some projects that are more in the domain of innovation or etc., to be replicated. And you have to keep in mind that we have been given this 50 million protection, meaning that EIB put at disposal of this project 125 million to be invested 2015, 2016, and 2017 only. So we have to invest that. So we are expecting that from 2018 onwards, we will be able to, if successful, to do far more than that. So where are we now on this? And I will give a little bit more of information of where we are. It has been signed the very last days of December of last year, signed and launched officially in February. We are now fine-tuning between Commission and ourselves how it will work in practice, while we are already collecting expression of interest from project promoters. And what we consider today as serious expression of interest are in the range of 20 projects, and what we see really as potentially serious in the sense that we may, within the coming months, go into to move further with the Commission in analyzing the project is in the region of 6 projects, let's say. However, this has been launched officially in February, and it is very difficult in such complex projects to already think that like this we can already in May do something. It is mainly because the eligibility criteria themselves, we still need to refine them, as I said. This is a life-funded facility, so there are some life objectives that need to be complied with. On the other, the bank also works on its own criteria in terms of financial eligibility, environmental, social, and so on eligibilities. We need to match all this. So we have to refine that. That is on the one side. And on the other, as you will see in the next slide, it is because the business model, the bankability of the projects themselves, today it is quite difficult, let's say, to get something that would allow to move further. So at least we have all the 4 categories presented to us among these 20 projects. We have at least 1 private equity and 1 financial intermediary, but now I can say that we have at least 2. And the countries covered today are these that I mentioned here. There are 28 countries in the EU. We have not received from a lot of other countries. So it is important that one of the messages today is to spread the fact that there are already countries that have expressed the interest, project promoters in some countries that have expressed the interest, some financial institutions in some countries that did same. It's important that the message could be passed to all the stakeholders that would be interested to go into it. Statistically, we have identified today more green infrastructure projects, and they are often with climate adaptation component. I feel here that it is probably one of the, I can't say the easiest, but the evident in terms of modeling the business case. Okay, so we have that. However, I haven't seen among these 20 projects something which is purely green infrastructure or purely payment for ecosystem services. You know the problem of identifying the value of biodiversity and etc. There are often, in the cases that have been presented now earlier, the fact that they are associated with a sort of business with it. And because there are businesses, like timber sales, like biomass, like ecotourism park, like fisheries, and etc., you associate that with a green infrastructure project, etc., you can have a bankable project. And often then, all the projects where you can identify pro-biodiversity businesses are those what we can tell as an EIB, a very readable project. We have not seen yet, even if we have looked at or proposed by some promoters, a very pure payment for ecosystem services. I think probably again because of the difficulty to price the ecosystem services that are underlying such pure projects. And where we haven't seen yet something serious are about biodiversity offsetting, but that is, I think it's natural in the sense that it is offsetting is always something that may raise a lot of problems in terms of voluntary obligations, regulatory, and etc. And people are hesitating, and we are not willing also to give up about the main principles, which are to first comply with the mitigation hierarchy and so on. So people are a little bit now refining what they could propose as biodiversity offsetting proposals. So then the main problem, and this is really where the place is today for us critical, is to make either a project promoter or a group of stakeholders in a project working on how to make a project, let's say, bankable in the sense that you will borrow money from the natural capital financing facility. So then you have to think about how you can generate the cash flows about it. So sorry to talk about a little pure finance about it, but the sense of the natural capital financing facility is it will lend, it's not a grant. Of course, as I said again, referring back to my chart of private assets, public goods, NCFF will not finance all things. NCFF will even sometimes or often have to leave beside some projects or part of a project that could only lie on grants. And that is the most important message. It is not made to finance all things, but it is not neither a grant portfolio. It has to find its place as a bankable pocket for this kind of project. And that's the main message that has to be retained about this. So the kind of, let's say, the recipients, the promoters, I think that we have now talked to what we think are representative of all that could request some financing from NCFF, public entities, conservation NGOs, financial intermediaries, utilities. Everybody have approached us because interested, but we would like to see more. We would like to see more because it's important for us to compare, to diversify. And that notion of diversification is important.
Excuse me, 2 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Okay. The business context is important. We will work whenever the business context is clear. And as I said, business model, bankability. Important thing to keep in mind, 100, 125, as I said again, is not too much. We have 28 countries. This could achieve only, let's say, 9 to 12 operations for 3 years. We have to do 3 to 4 per year. We have to put some rules, which is that project we target is between 5 and 15. Per project, we can provide with 1 million of technical assistance facility. We have limited per member state 20% of that total. And try to not go beyond, let's say, 1/3 per category. 10-year, but with possibility of longer for the term of the operations, providing with a 3-year of grace period because these are pilot projects. And very important also, we need to align interest with the promoters, so the NCFF will not finance the totality of any kind of projects. So for loan, for example, 75% is the maximum that the NCFF could contribute to. So the eligibility, public bodies, private, commercial or non-commercial organizations, they need to have the capacity, the experience, prove that they have the allocated resources in line with what they are requesting, good governance, could provide with acceptable and good co-investors, transparent, and we will need from whoever is borrowing or benefiting from the NCFF the adequate reporting, that they are following the objectives of the NCFF targets. This is very important. So there is no special formalities for those requesting loan or whatever from the NCFF. We have a mailbox. those that are interested only post the relevant and sufficient information once they have consulted the website of the LIFE and the EIB. And the way it works is more or less what we have here. We identify a project opportunity from what is being posted to us. Once we see that we could present it to the DGM and the DG Clima for confirmation of eligibility, then we start like how we work at the EIB. We engage this discussion with the promoter, and then we start what we call the pre-appraisal. We ask a lot of information. We send them a due diligence questionnaire and so on. And if the due diligence questionnaire, desk visit, eventually site visits are fine, then the EIB goes to its management committee, go to its board of directors after that. The loan is approved and starts the negotiation, finalized, and we start disbursing. So it depends on the project itself. It may take from 5 months, 6 months, let's say, to very long if a project is very difficult to appraise. One word about the support and capacity building, meaning the technical assistance. It is only for those we consider that are eligible projects, and it has still to be refined, but it is to help on the feasibility of the operation itself, developing the capacity of the final recipient of the loan, and helping also later on the reporting and monitoring processes. And the stage where we consider to adjoin this kind of support facility is on a ad hoc basis. It depends on where we feel with the promoters the main place to have it. So thank you very much. This is the team of dedicated team at the EIB working on the NCFF. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very extensive explanation how the EIB and NCFF works. And I was very pleased to see that more than half of the project ideas and operations, at least proposed for consideration, has also the climate adaptation component, which is very important in the context of the biodiversity policy implementation when we are talking about the mainstreaming of biodiversity policy, and also for the delivering different benefits, and not only the biodiversity benefits, but also some other social, economic, and if those benefits will cover other environmental fields, that's very good. I have a question to the audience. Are you flooded with the information? Do you have some questions to these presentations regarding cohesion policy and NCFF? Yes, please. It's coming.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Some of it was new to me, some not. So let's me, on behalf of Friends of the Earth Germany, asking the question, if you do a biodiversity impact assessment on the rest of the project you're doing at the investment bank, because there is a bit in the fear at the NGO community that the negative impact on the one side is larger than the new opportunities arising with the new instrument there.
I think that at this stage there is also the question of additionality that probably I didn't mention as the main component, and when we will go for the eligibility criteria that we are currently refining with the Commission, that is, I think, the main component that has to be added. I only insisted on the financial additionality, which is about the riskiness and the business model on one side and the small projects on the other. But let's assume, for example, that it is a simple afforestation, reforestation, okay, in one country. There may be reasons why it is more important today to replant trees, but replanting trees may have a lot of reasons and may have a lot of economic reasons, and others may really have some ecological reasons. And if we have to make a choice between the two, of course, the first thing is what I could call then the private assets, as I mentioned. Probably if there is no value added for the biodiversity, I think that would not be an CFF eligible project as far as I feel it today. But wherever it is really very important that there is a loss of biodiversity in other places, then I am sure that this would be ticked as, yes, there is a strong additionality. I think that's the way that how we see it at the EIB, and I think also that the Commission sees it like that also.
Any other question? Back there.
Thank you very much. Trakta Ivrin from Antashka and the EEB. A question again for the EIB. In the context of the EIB's investment, compliance with European environmental law, I was wondering, could you just clarify what is the EIB's requirement in terms of funding if there is an issue or a query regarding compliance with the EU environmental law, and what level of determination is required in respect of that alleged compliance, particularly given the longevity or the timeline that there is for the Commission's infringement proceedings and indeed findings from the Court of Justice. And then related to that, in the context of the NCFF, frequently restoration projects are required consequent on a breach of EU law. And to what extent is the NCFF criteria considering those issues, and what constraints might it put on the funding? Because it would be a shame indeed for biodiversity to take a second hit and be further compromised if it was, you know, the issue with restoration was consequent on a breach in the first instance, and then it was unable to avail of NCFF funding in order to facilitate restoration. But nonetheless, there are issues with who ultimately should actually be funding the restoration.
Thank you. Any other question from audience? Yeah,
May I ask my colleague Matthias Zollner to answer that question, please?
Thank you. I'm Matthias Zollner. I'm the head of the Environment and Climate and Social Office in the EIB. And there was a general question which I would like to reply. It looks a bit as if the NCFF was seen as an alibi for other, so to say, non-compliant or dirty projects. That is not at all the case. I mean, James mentioned briefly we have 10 environmental and social standards. We have a standard on biodiversity, and that standard is applied across the whole portfolio. So, and we, to reply to the other question, I mean, EU legislation and EU directives is the basis of our approach to environment and biodiversity, and that's laid down in our handbook and the 10 standards which have to be applied by all project promoters in any sector, not only in environmental or biodiversity sectors, also in sectors which have only an indirect impact on biodiversity, and it does not only refer to protected areas, it covers all regions. I think that may reply the two questions, but I'm available if there are other questions.
Thank you. Any other question? If not, that there will be, of course, sorry, Fia, I overlooked you.
I apologize, but I just wanted to comment on two comments and questions put to James on the EIB and CFF financing facility. The first concerns the financing facility itself. The financing facility is indeed a facility which should help financing biodiversity measures also beyond obligations. Let's take James very sensibly presented a number of possibilities on green infrastructure. Green infrastructure measures are not measures imposed by EU legislation. They are going far beyond, because biodiversity should not stop at the border of Habitats or Birds Directive. This is the whole concept beyond which underlies biodiversity and this NCFF instrument. It is a possibility to go beyond legal obligations also. This is the first element. And then just to be clear on what can be financed even under an infringement procedure, because I think there was a specific question addressing this issue. We have a clear understanding with EIB, with the environmental department from EIB, on big regional funding projects, that a regional funding project should not be co-financed where there is already an infringement ongoing. And this is also why we have such an excellent cooperation with EIB colleagues, and we receive all projects to be financed by EIB for a vetting from the Commission perspective. This is a first element. A second element, however, is that once there has been, for instance, a court ruling, and I can say this because this has happened in the field of environment in waste projects, for instance, that we had court rulings on illegal landfills or on other waste infringements, and the member state concerned by the ruling has required to access regional EIB funding in order to put the necessary infrastructure in place, that we have agreed to, be it regional funding, be it funding through EIB, because at the end of the day, what matters in this context is that the situation is put right as soon as possible and with the instruments at disposal. So it is not a black and white situation. It needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. I'd also like to follow up on this question. I see quite a lot of potential here for interesting projects, and another question is whether we need to use the LIFE fund for this, or whether other funds in the EU budget would have been maybe more appropriate for this. But this has been a political decision, and this is just for a starting phase, so that's not an issue here now. I have two questions. One is a very practical example that we have in Spain at the moment. Our Spanish BirdLife partner is teaming up with a small wind farm developing company that wants to develop bladeless windmills that are more bird friendly, and they're searching for entering the market. Would this be a possible idea for such a project, just as a practical example. The second question relates to the contested issue of the biodiversity offsets, and here maybe we can be very precise in the wording. Following up from what Pia said, are we talking here about also beyond legislation or only beyond legislation when this facility could come into play? Because you mentioned that you have very little proposals yet, and you will insist in the mitigation hierarchy. Does that mean you would insist in the mitigation hierarchy for the voluntary offsets? Because the obligatory compensation under the nature directives are anyway not a question here, or is there a gray zone where projects could also be imaginable in the sphere of Natura 2000, let's say?
Normally, for the second part, it's no question to go on things that are not on respecting the legislation. So, let's say it is on voluntary offset, but I think this is the main principle. Unless colleagues from Commission could add other, but that is the basic. About the BirdLife, it is about, when you say windmill, it is to improve...
Well, to reduce the risk of bird collisions with windmills. I'm not able to find the right technical words in English, I'm sorry, but it was just to bring an example, and they are looking for ways to enter the market.
That they didn't, yes.
Hold a minute.
I mean, a new wind turbine which is more friendly and does less harm to birds, in my mind, would clearly be eligible as a pro-biodiversity business.
And just to complement on the first issue, on the first question, it would of course have to be going beyond. So this is for areas that are not covered by obligations under the nature legislation. So that's to answer your question and reassure you about this. However, what could well be possible is that the income generated could be used also within. That is something that could be done, but the project itself could not be happening in an area that is linked to obligations stemming from the legislation.
We will have possibility to discuss these issues also over the coffee break after this session. But now I would like to invite Konstantin Kreiser, because as we heard yesterday, Commission promised that midterm review will be out autumn, but BirdLife is ready now to give their view on the midterm assessment of the EU Biodiversity Strategy. Konstantin, please.
Thank you. So I'm very pleased to be allowed, also by my colleagues in Brussels, to present to you a publication that we only launch next week at the 2nd of June in the European Parliament, so during or at the eve of Green Week. And this is our BirdLife assessment of where we stand on the biodiversity strategy. Does not move. Yeah. Okay. This is actually already our third report on EU biodiversity policy. We did one in 2010 that was actually an assessment of the 2010 target. Then in 2012, on the occasion of the CBD conference in Hyderabad, we published a first assessment of the starting phase of the biodiversity strategy. And now we have a midterm assessment. This is clearly a policy assessment. This is far less precise than the State of Nature report. That is actually a scientific assessment that we very much welcome. It is a policy assessment based on knowledge and experience and data collected by the BirdLife partnership, but also using information and support from other NGOs, and of course based a lot on the data from the State of Nature report, depending on the different targets that we look at. I'd like to take you through a number of the elements here. I tried not to repeat too much that was said yesterday, so I will be brief on agriculture because there I had a presentation yesterday. And I want to give you a bit of a sneak preview on the publication and make you curious, and hopefully those who are in Brussels next week invite you to attend the event in the European Parliament. Maybe the battery is tired. Okay. So we have looked at the biodiversity strategy that we still, as back in 2011, see as a milestone for environmental and biodiversity policy. So we still, and I would like to stress this in the start, see this as a very good and important strategy that we hope will be reconfirmed by the Council and the European Parliament later this year. And it allows us actually the way the strategy was written to really assess it. That was not possible with the strategy before. So we are very happy to have this as a benchmark. And of course, the results are mixed. And these are our key messages. The EU has the right nature legislation, and where it's implemented and financed, the declines of species have been turned around already in specific cases that we have in the State of Nature report, for example. However, we are far from halting biodiversity loss. We have still a significant part of European biodiversity deteriorating, so it will be very hard to meet the headline target of halting biodiversity loss by 2020. Well, we identify the key problems as poor implementation, enforcement and financing of the EU nature legislation and in the common agricultural policy. So, of course, there's other issues, but these are the two outstanding findings. We also want to, and we were very glad that there is this target 6 of the strategy on the global dimension, where we also included in the key messages, acknowledging that the EU is the largest and is basically improving its performance even more as largest donor of international biodiversity aid. But on its own biodiversity footprint, speaking especially of the resource efficiency and production consumption patterns, the EU continues to live much beyond what it should do, and it harms ecosystems around the planet. The strategy has in total 37 actions. We tried to assess each of the actions. In 4 actions, we were not able to have an honest assessment because of lack of knowledge, or in one case, the action was not due yet. But the other ones we divided into a very simple traffic light system of actions where we saw good progress, insufficient progress, or basically a failure or zero progress or very little progress. And when I go now through the 6 targets, you will always see on the right-hand side the traffic light for this target. So on the headline target, just quickly, the headline target for 2020, halting the loss of biodiversity and starting restoring biodiversity, we still have a problem. We have the red list. These are the EU red lists, and showing the extinction risks of various taxonomic groups, especially in the area of freshwater. We have big extinction risks and still heavy declines. So there, the situation doesn't look good. The same is with the common birds, especially the farmland birds. I talked about this yesterday already. We have the phenomenon that common birds become less common, and the trend is, especially for farmland birds, very worrying. But we have, and we are quite explicit in this report also, successes that show conservation works, the nature directives work, if we want it, if we do it. So there's a number of examples that, and studies also quoted, that we really think we should use when going into the debate about the biodiversity strategy review that the Commission is undertaking now in the next month. So target 1, we think some good progress has been made in implementation of the nature directives, but as I said before, the data itself on the species and habitats are still worrying. But we can say the nature directives have started to save and restore species, and we have, and I think we need to acknowledge this, that we have a major progress in the state of knowledge. The State of Nature report is a milestone. It's really something that the EU can be very proud of. And we have a progress in the interactions with stakeholders. Compared to 2010, I think there's much more understanding on what the directives mean. There's new guidance document. I think that is something that really has to be acknowledged. However, and here I go already in the section what needs to be done under this target, we still have gaps in the Natura 2000 network, especially appalling gaps in the marine areas. We have big problems with protection and management of Natura 2000 sites. And we have, and that's maybe the key to everything, we have a big funding problem for Natura 2000. And therefore, we need to go into better enforcement of the directives, into better surveillance of what's happening to species and sites. And it was mentioned already yesterday, we need the Commission to table the Environmental Inspections Directive and take also more of these systematic infringement procedures if necessary to really fix things that are broken in certain member states' administrative systems, and then we can avoid many small cases and small infringement procedures in the future. Just a few examples under Target 1. This report focuses a lot, I must say, on Target 1 because we now have new data. We have the State of Nature report, we have the red lists coming up soon, also next week of birds. So this is really a focus of this report. The last report focused a lot on the EU budget because the budget review was underway. So it was, in the State of Nature report, it was already mentioned, this graph, I think. So we have the black lines are for habitats types, species under Habitats Directive and Birds Directive, the targets of the Target 1. We have in the darker colors the favorable part or the secure part, and then the lighter one is the improving part. But we added on the right-hand side the deterioration, because the target actually says also to stop deterioration. So here we see there's a lot to do to meet our targets. The status of birds is in the report, of course, quite prominently. It's a BirdLife report after all. And I want to look a little bit more into the red section here. These are the 17% of species in the EU that are actually on the red list that are threatened by extinction. We did some analysis. Of course, you can criticize any analysis, but we found it an interesting exercise to look at member state responsibility for threatened species, for threatened bird species. I'm talking now only on the 17% that you have seen before. We looked at how many threatened bird species a member state is hosting and looked at the percentage of the EU population the member state hosts and calculated the responsibility for this species, added it up, and then we had this total responsibility for threatened species. I don't go into individual countries, but this will be in some interesting tables in the report. We also looked at how are the species doing? So looking at the trends. So if a country has positive trends for its threatened species, it scores better than if a country has many threatened species that are declining. Here we have Cyprus on number 1. This is something that has to be treated a bit with care because the 4 species Cyprus has as threatened species are at the fringe of their biogeographical distribution, and most of them are outside the EU and they are increasing. So there are some of these disclaimers and footnotes that we have to make on certain aspects of this calculation. But it still can help with the discussion, we feel. Under the Habitats Directive, we, for example, did this calculation that we looked at member states that have more than 50% in favorable status and those that have more than 50% in unfavorable status, both species and habitats. So the lists are, of course, much longer on the right-hand side. But we have some member states that have still quite a lot of species in favorable status and habitats. Of course, you can find all sorts of reasons for this, and we elaborate on this in the report, but we felt it can be an added value also from our side to go a bit into member state comparisons. Successes. So then we took actually the species and habitats that are in unfavorable status and looked at their trends. And there was actually only one member state, the Netherlands, where more than 50% of the unfavorable species are improving. And on the other side, you see the member states where more than 50% of the unfavorable species or habitats, this is all habitats directive now, are declining. We have looked, of course, also at the SPA designation. You know this comparison with the important bird areas. Here especially the message is that on the marine SPA designation, some member states have really something to do still. Moving on to management and protection of sites, we looked at SPA management plans, have quite differences between member states in terms of the existence of SPA management plans. This is not talking about the quality of management plans. And what is actually really worrying is what is happening illegally, or what is happening in practice with Natura 2000 sites that are officially designated. We have picked a case study from Italy, where our Italian BirdLife partner, LIPO, and WWF Italy have collected 30 cases, documented with pictures, often aerial pictures, before and after destructions. And here, for example, you have a Natura SCI and an SPA in Sicily, with greenhouses being built over a specific period of time within the sites. And it is, in cases like this, very unlikely that there are overriding public interests that could justify these constructions, and very often not even an appropriate assessment has been done. We move on to financing. A lot has been said already. We think a fundamental rethinking is needed on the financing of Natura 2000, because the integration approach of using the other funds is, despite widening options in the EU budget and at the EU level, is not picked up by member states for various reasons. And we, as I mentioned, I think yesterday, we will present 2 models in a discussion paper next Monday in Brussels as German BirdLife partner on either going in the direction of a dedicated EU fund for ecosystems, or to really reforming the integration approach by making it really more binding and obligatory to use the other funds for Natura 2000 financing. So a lot is said in the report on target 1, but also we do not neglect the other targets. However, I will be a bit briefer here now. On target 2, we see a mixed picture. We think that as we saw also today, our understanding of the ecosystem services and also the biodiversity proofing of EU-funded projects, as mentioned in the strategy, is making progress. But on the restoration side, this is the one action where we really see very little or actually no progress. This is worrying, because apparently no member state has really provided a proper restoration framework under the strategy, and we do not see how this should change in the next years to really start restoring ecosystems, and 15% of the degraded ecosystems as spelled out in the target. On green infrastructure, we like the concept. It's very interesting. We had high hopes for the cohesion policy, but it's a bit too early maybe still to analyze, but we feel there is the critical amount of funding from the EU budget is missing for really make this concept meaningful in terms of restoration and connecting our nature side. The No Net Loss initiative is delayed. We had many discussions about it, but and we are interested to see what will happen next. But we think there is a lot of scope to achieve no net loss with better implementation of existing legislation and some legislative gaps that should be closed in the area of inspections, for example, as mentioned, but also soil. The soil directive is something that is needed to help our ecosystem recovery. On agriculture, I will not speak a lot about it. This is the big failure, we think, of the last years. There is no progress on the target, we feel, on as far as agriculture is concerned. The greening of the first pillar is meaningless for biodiversity. The second pillar support is insufficient and often not effective. So we have a lot to do in the next years. We will probably not fix the whole system by 2020, but the reviews of the greening, of cross-compliance, of rural development should be used to at least make the most urgent corrections. More positive, we are on the fisheries policy. We think with the reformed CFP, the EU is now equipped for making fisheries sustainable as a policy framework. However, we still need a lot to do on implementing the legislation and to really set the catch limits at a level that actually fit to the ecosystem ambitions on the ecosystem approach that is luckily part of the common fisheries policy. We have, looking at the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, to say that and it's a fact that European seas are not yet in the good environmental status, and member states are not doing enough to achieve it. And we go on an issue that is, of course, very, very close to us as BirdLife is the seabird bycatch. It's a terrible problem, and it's really a problem it's a problem that can threaten species. We have threatened Steller's eiders in fishing nets in the Baltic Sea, or the gannets here to see. This is a big problem, and we were happy that in 2012 there was the EU Seabird Plan of Action adopted. It was non-binding, but it was then still taken up in the CFP reform. However, the Commission so far as the first proposal was concerned, did basically ignore this issue in the Baltic Sea multi-annual plan, and I understand that it was later brought in by the other institutions. So we really would like to see quicker and more progress on seabird bycatch. Invasives, a full green score, so we think the progress has been good. We have a regulation adopted in the last years that follows also the CBD principles of prevention, early detection, rapid eradication and management of, depending on how established the species, the invasive alien species are. And we now are in the phase of adopting the lists of invasive species of EU concern. I think it was mentioned yesterday by François already that it is really not a good situation that very few member states only have adopted the Convention on Ballast Water. Invasive species are on the rise, so this is a graph just demonstrating that we are not only looking at the bird part of things, but across the taxa we have rising amounts of invasive species, and we're very happy the Commission is taking this issue seriously. On the global dimension, finally, on Target 6, we have again a mixed picture. We have, on the one hand, a really disappointing development on the resource efficiency side and on the footprint of the EU globally. The withdrawal of the circular economy package was a big blow to this agenda that has been introduced by the previous commissioner. So we really hope that the promise of a new, even more ambitious package to be tabled soon will be kept, because this is not only an issue of reducing the actual footprint of the EU globally, but and of course at home as well, but it's also a matter of how seriously the EU is taken on this issue around the world, how seriously the EU is trying to address its consumption and production patterns. We have some progress on the trade and development policies. I don't go into details here now, but it's more in the report. The big problem is the subsidies. that is here under target 6, and I think it's good that it's placed under target 6 in the strategy, because it's also a promise made by the EU at the CBD level. At the last CBD COP in Korea, again, even a timetable was adopted by the parties to the CBD of phasing out and reforming harmful subsidies. But as I said before, with the CAP, we cannot really see that the EU is progressing a lot here. On the positive end, and I want to make this very clear that we are very happy about this role on international biodiversity financing. I've been myself at the last 3 COPs of the CBD and seen that EU has played a very constructive and positive role on brokering also a compromise between donors and poor countries. And actually, there's no indication that the promise made should not be met. The promise being doubling the international aid by 2016. And the EU thus has confirmed its global leadership in this area. I've already touched on the harmful subsidies. Bioenergy, we have a special section on bioenergy in this part of the report. You could also have it in another part of the report, but we placed it there. We make slow progress, but we have still not enough of the necessary safeguards for the bioenergy policy. Here is a special slide on the resource mobilization. I mentioned the CBD development. I would also like to mention, like we do in the report, the BirdLife initiative that was presented in Korea, and the LIFE program of DG Environment that are both targeting now also, the LIFE program is now opening up more to international projects, and the BirdLife initiative is especially for international projects in the area of biodiversity. And last but not least, of course, the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol is an important step forward. So, concluding, will we make the 2020 target? We think, yes, we can, but only under a number of conditions that are not easy to meet. So I think the first and most important thing to say here is we should not now start to try to fix something that is not broken, meaning the nature legislation and also not the biodiversity strategy. Let's not rebuild the tools that are working and that we have well thought through when they came into force, but rather focus on the things that do not work. And there are a number. So for example, the nature financing needs to be fixed using the upcoming midterm reviews of the EU budget. But it's not only about the EU budget, it's also about member state budgets and the resources the member states give to their own nature administration. The massive cuts in all basically member states in nature administration is blocking implementation of the directives, is blocking the acceptance of the directives, and is a major issue, I think, across the EU. And the Commission cannot do a lot about this probably, but at least the Commission, I think, should call on member states to take care more of the personal resources involved in nature administration. We have to move on to enforcement more. I mentioned it, stop the illegal things happening in Natura 2000 sites, stop illegal bird killing, and we feel the EU has a stronger role to play here. The picture that you saw about the greenhouses, these were aerial pictures. You can, from a desk in Brussels, see a lot of things that happen if you have the right software and if you have the right images. So we feel the EU Commission should have more competences and more technical equipment and resources to track what's happening in the member states. We know every square meter of rainforest that is burned in Brazil, why can't we detect at least the most blatant habitat destruction in our own member states? So, and we need not only to stop the loss, but start to restore what we still can restore, both ecosystems in general, but also the species and habitats, because this is the obligation of the nature directives to bring them in a good status. We need to change the course radically in the agriculture policy and implement what we have now in the common fisheries policy in line with the ecosystem approach. And as I mentioned, table an ambitious circular economy package and make progress on resource efficiency. So this is quite an ambitious wish list, but I think that it would be too early to say that we cannot make the target and the objectives, and therefore I think we should use the last and remaining 5 years to collectively, member states and European Commission and civil society and private sector to work on that list. You will be able to download the report from next Tuesday from the BirdLife website. You will get it as a hard copy in the European Parliament on the same day, and you can always contact me or the main author, Wouter Langhout from BirdLife. He's the main author, I'm a co-author, for further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Konstantin, for this refreshing presentation. At least from this point of view, here on the podium, it seemed like a cold shower but I think that is the important mission NGOs should play, not allow the member state institutions to fall asleep. And I think that I was glad to see that you're also using already in the nature field established the traffic light system, which make for evaluation the progress on the action implementation, which for this system we for some years already are used, and now it's easier to explain also to other colleagues on which actions we are making some progress and where some more efforts to be done. Questions to Konstantin on this assessment, or you're very welcome to join the launch event next week in the Parliament. If no questions from the audience, I would like to turn to our Latvian Nature Director, Daiga Vilkaste, for concluding remarks on this conference. I hope that you will not have to redraft all your presentation after hearing Konstantin's presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you all for staying here until the end of the conference. And I will start with just some things doesn't work. Oh, okay. Some basic facts from yesterday and maybe as well for today. EU 28 footprint is above its biocapacity. And another fact that only 23% of species and 16% of habitat is being in a good status. It seems quite important facts. And now, moving forward. Forest sector, agriculture, fisheries, and urban planning play a major role in achieving Natura 2000 and EU biodiversity objectives. As well, marine ecosystem approach is very crucial. As well, evaluation, protection, evaluation of ecosystem services, as well, elaboration of Natura 2000 sites in marine territories. Natura 2000 is separate network still need important progress and improvement are necessary. Management plans, management of territories, restoration, financing question, and sometimes, it's as well as new territories, designation of new territories. Wider use of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure solutions can help to achieve its goal for 2020 to halt the loss of biodiversity. Next slide will be dedicated to CAP. Probably this is and this was the biggest disappointment for yesterday and today, this CAP reform. I remember about this dead horse or empty shell, what we heard yesterday, these comparisons. There was a lot of different views, a lot of discussions before, but the result is not as expected. idea of greening was quite good, but something went wrong. For example, grasslands, wetlands, we see that it's still bad trends. It's still problems with birds, farmland birds, butterflies in grasslands, and it's quite a dangerous situation. Pesticides, what we need and what do we want to do? How we can change this use of pesticides? Do we need some new approach? Legislation, a substantial volume of relevant EU legislation already exists, but it lacks adequate integration to sectoral policies. Do we need some new one? Probably no. Yesterday it's quite clear, and today was quite clear answer to this question. But as well, it was message from business sector and from energy sector that clear rules of the game for different sectors are very important. Discussion, education before regulations and before implementation is very, very important as well. And only after the discussions and way to try to implement, we need control, evaluation, maybe sometimes as well some sanctions and punishment. But we can't start with control and with sanctions. Financing. Integration of biodiversity aspects into key EU financing instruments is still very important. We need to look from a holistic approach. We need to mobilize all existing financial resources. Looking for the new opportunities and solutions, a wider use of existing financial instruments, a new model or instrument for financing of biodiversity. Actually, there are a lot of different financial instruments, but we need willingness to do something and to achieve progress. Without willingness, it's very hard to do in situation if we have money but we don't want to achieve our targets. Clear conservation objectives and measures are essential. Monitoring, reporting, knowledge. We recognize that still here a lot of gaps. Crucial is communication, cooperation, involvement of stakeholders, general, regional level, municipalities. Maybe we can look to the new participants, new stakeholders. We saw yesterday examples from military sector, military areas, energy sector. It's maybe not a new one player, but anyway, we need new debate with these stakeholders, different sectors, and it's still, it was important previous times, but anyway, this discussion must to be elaborated in future. The EU target of halting the loss of biodiversity and the degradation of the ecosystem services by 2020 is a serious challenge. Achieving EU targets requires more ambitious actions and policy, knowledge, research, investments, and innovation. But we still expect the midterm review of the EU biodiversity strategy, and I hope that this event, conference today, and discussions today and yesterday will bring some contribution to protect our nature, to protect our biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you, Daiga. These were just a few of the most important issues and messages which came out during these 2 days. And we really hope from the Latvian presidency side that this will serve as an input for the midterm review. Also, the critical views and suggestions provided by the participants here in the conference also will find its place there in the midterm review. As to one of the points mentioned in the Daiga's summary on clear rules of the game, that was mentioned not only yesterday by the industry representatives, but that was also one of the messages which came out of the informal council, where also the ministers said that clearer rules of the game, clear requirements from the legislation would facilitate better implementation of the legislation. And also we heard that we should move away from the narrow biology focus on biodiversity to more bigger picture and to try to see all the interlinkages. That could also help us to find some new allies and partners in the implementation of the biodiversity strategy. With this summary from our side, the official part of the conference, the content-wise, is finished. Unless you have some burning issues, I would like to start the closure ceremony of the conference.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that on behalf of us all, I want to thank you very much for organizing and for leading us through this conference in such an effective way. It has been a very dense, very condensed information session, and not only information, also discussion session. So really a big thank you from us, from the Commission side, but for sure from all us sitting here.
When I started, I would like to start the closure ceremony. Actually, that was not a sort of invitation to thank us, but actually I was trying to say that I would like to thank all you. First of all the presenters and all the moderators for giving us very interesting and information and experience, giving the critical views and also suggestions how we can improve our activities. And for moderators for animating the discussion, I apologize for those who were caught on very short notice. Thanks to all of you for active involvement and also dedication to biodiversity and its maintaining to serve and enjoy not only us, but also, more importantly, next generations. And also from my side, and I think also from your side, I would like to thank all my colleagues in the ministry, especially Datte, sitting somewhere in the backstage probably, and also Ilse from the Presidency Secretariat for taking care of all organizational aspects of the conference. Thanks to all of you. And before we all leave, I have some household announcements. For the first on the Nature Concert Hall this evening. As it was said that Nature Concert Hall is education and awareness-raising event employing all human senses, touch, vision, hearing, feeling, and taste. And we hope you will use all these senses tonight. The bus to the Nature Concert Hall will leave from Hotel Tallink at 7:30 sharp. So those who are not staying in the Tallink, please be there a bit in advance, because we have to drive a bit and then we have to be there on time, and bus will leave on 7:30. I will not wait, and I will feel sorry for those who could be left behind. And please pass this message also to those who are not here, but who surely are coming for the Nature Directors meeting and would like to join. And dress up warm. It is not a rain expected, but still it will be not very warm this evening, and it is as it is totally outdoor event. Be prepared for that. And we will be back here close to midnight. That is about the concert hall. And the secondly, announcement for those who will we will not present in the Nature Directors meeting or any other meetings, but are registered for this site visit to Adaži site. You have to be at 8 at Hotel Radisson Blue, Latvia. I will give the details. You can contact me on this after this session. And we hope that you will enjoy your rest of your stay here in Riga and Latvia, which has revealed some of its beauty. And we also hope that you have the feeling, I should come here back again. Thank you.